Oh,
Nobody
my
expected the boy to
God.
survive. They whispered about it in town.
That morning started like any other. Cold, hungry, silent. But this day was different.
The bank was coming that afternoon. The final notice had arrived. My father had the look of a man who had finally broken.
He looked at nothing, and in that nothing, he decided.
William Brenner had owned this farm for 15 years. He had built the cabin himself, stone by stone. He had cleared the land with his own hands. He had worked every single day, in sun and rain and snow, trying to make something grow in soil that seemed determined to give nothing back. And now it was over. The bank would take the land. The house would be gone. The family would have to go somewhere, but William had no idea where. He had no money. He had no relatives who could help. He had nothing at all except a wife and 6 children who were looking at him like he had all the answers. That was when he made the decision. Later, people would say that William was a bad man. Some would say he was cruel and heartless. But the truth was more complicated than that. William was a man who loved his children, but was drowning in desperation. He had 5 younger children who were still small. Jacob was the oldest, the strongest, the one who needed the most food. And in William's broken mind, a terrible thought had taken shape. If Jacob was gone, there would be more food for the others. Maybe the farm could be worked by the rest of them for 1 more year. Maybe something would change. Maybe, by some miracle, they could survive. William never said this out loud. He did not sit his son down and explain the logic. Instead, he simply stood up from the table that morning, went to get Jacob's worn blanket and a small bag of bread, and told the boy to follow him outside. Jacob was only 12 years old. He did not understand what was happening at first. He thought his father was taking him to do some work, maybe to check the animals or gather wood. They walked out of the cabin into the grey morning. The sky was heavy with clouds, the wind was sharp and cold. And then his father stopped walking, turned to look at Jacob with eyes that held no love and no hope, and spoke words that would echo in the boy's mind for the rest of his life. "You cannot stay here anymore," William said. His voice was flat and final, like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "There is not enough food. There is not enough room. You are big and strong, and you eat more than the younger ones. You need to go. Find somewhere else." Jacob did not cry. He did not beg. He did not fall to his knees and ask why. Something in him simply accepted the words and understood that his life as he knew it was finished. He was being thrown away like something broken and useless. He was 12 years old, and his own father had decided he was worth more dead than alive, or at least worth more gone than staying. His father handed him the blanket and the small bag of bread. There was no embrace. There was no word of comfort or love. William simply turned around and walked back toward the cabin, leaving his son standing alone in the cold morning, holding the only things he owned in the world. Jacob stood there for a long time, not moving, not understanding fully what had just happened. Then he heard the cabin door close behind his father, and the sound was like the final door closing on his childhood. He was no longer part of a family. He was no longer part of anything. He was just a boy, alone in the mountains, and the winter was coming. For the first few hours, Jacob walked without thinking much about direction. He just moved away from the farm, following a path that led into the forest. His mind could not process the rejection. It felt like a dream, like something that could not possibly be real. His own father had thrown him out. His mother had not tried to stop it. His younger brothers and sisters had watched him leave, their eyes wide and confused, not understanding that one of them was disappearing from their lives forever. The bread ran out after 3 days. Jacob had tried to make it last, eating only small portions. But his young body needed food, and hunger was a constant pain in his belly. He drank from streams and ate what he could find. Some berries that were still frozen on branches, bark from trees, roots that he dug from the cold earth. His blanket was thin and worn, and it did not keep out the cold at night. He would wrap himself in it and try to sleep, but the cold would creep through the material like something alive and hungry. By the end of the first week, Jacob was shaking constantly. His body was burning calories faster than he could replace them. His thin clothes were not made for the temperature of the high mountains in late December. He had seen snow his entire life, but he had always been able to come inside to a warm fire. Now, there was no warm fire. There was nothing but the endless cold and the empty forest and the terrible understanding that he was dying. But something in Jacob refused to accept this ending. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the strength that children sometimes have, a kind of animal will to survive that does not need reasons or logic. Maybe it was simply that his young mind could not fully understand how bad things really were, and this lack of understanding gave him a kind of hope that kept him moving forward. He climbed higher into the mountains, following a canyon that seemed to offer some protection from the worst of the wind. He found places where rocks created natural shelter. He learned how to build a small fire by watching other people's knowledge that somehow lived in his body, even though no one had ever taught him. He caught a rabbit using a method he did not remember learning. He found a cave where he could sleep, where the temperature was slightly higher than the open air, and he refused to die. That was the real story that the townspeople did not understand. It was not that Jacob survived by luck. It was not that he found some magical salvation. It was simply that a young boy, rejected by everyone and everything, dug deeper into himself and found a will to live that was stronger than the forces trying to kill him. He was not special. He was not trained. He was just desperate enough to keep moving, hour after hour, day after day, into the freezing mountains that should have killed him by Christmas. If Marcus had been walking 5 minutes faster that morning, Jacob would have died alone in the snow. If the weather had been slightly worse, forcing Marcus to take a different path, Jacob would never have been found. If Marcus had not stopped to rest on that particular rock at that particular moment, the boy would have frozen to death between 2 trees, his body not discovered until spring when the wolves would have already scattered his bones across the frozen ground. Life and death sometimes come down to these tiny moments, these small turns that nobody can predict or control. And on a cold morning in early January, when the snow was falling thick and the wind was howling through the peaks, Marcus happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the wrong time. Jacob had been walking through the forest for 3 weeks when his body finally gave up trying. He did not understand what was happening to him. His mind had become strange and unclear. He would walk for hours with no memory of where he was going or what he was doing. Sometimes he would lie down in the snow because his legs would simply stop working. Other times, he would stand in one place for long periods, staring at nothing, his body shaking with cold and fever and hunger, all mixed together into something that felt like dying. The fever had started 5 days earlier. Jacob had drunk water from a stream without thinking about what might be in that water. There was the body of a dead animal upstream, rotting in the cold. The water looked clean and cold and pure, but it was carrying sickness. Jacob's stomach had started hurting almost immediately. Then came the fever, the kind of fever that makes you feel like your blood is boiling inside your skin. His body temperature climbed higher and higher, and his mind began to separate from reality in dangerous ways. He did not remember leaving the cave where he had been sleeping. He did not remember walking into the forest toward the stream. He did not remember collapsing near a group of tall trees that blocked out some of the falling snow. The last thing he remembered clearly was lying on his back, looking up at the white sky, feeling like he was sinking down into something very deep and very dark. Marcus was a man of 62 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that the mountains did not care about sentiment or hope, or any of the soft feelings that civilization had taught people to believe were important. The mountains cared only about strength and knowledge and the hard will to survive. Marcus had come to the mountains 15 years ago to escape from a world that had broken him. He had left behind a wife who loved another man, children who did not understand him, and a society that told him he was a failure. In the mountains, Marcus had found something that the cities could never give him, the truth about what he was capable of surviving. He was walking toward his cabin that morning, returning from a trap line where he had checked his fur catches. It had been a good winter so far. He had enough beaver pelts to trade for supplies when spring came. He had enough food to last until the hunting season began again. He had enough solitude to keep the ghosts of his old life from bothering him too much. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as he wanted it to be. He wanted nothing, and needed nothing, and expected nothing. This was how he had learned to live, and then he saw something on the ground that made him stop walking. At first, Marcus thought it was just an animal. The shape was too small to be a man, too still to be alive. He had learned to ignore such things. A dead deer, a dead elk, a dead anything was no concern of his. The mountains were full of death, and Marcus had made peace with death a long time ago. But something made him walk closer. Some small part of him that he had thought was completely dead seemed to stir. The boy was not moving. His skin was the color of the snow around him, white and pale and completely still. His lips were blue. His eyes were closed. Marcus was quite certain that the child was already dead. He had seen death enough times to know what it looked like. This boy had been exposed to the cold and the fever and the mountains for weeks, and he had finally lost the fight. Marcus felt a strange sensation in his chest, something that might have been sadness, or might have been something else entirely, something he had not allowed himself to feel in many years. But then Jacob's chest moved. It was so small that Marcus almost missed it. Just the tiniest rise and fall of the ribcage, the smallest sign that the body was still breathing, that some part of this child's will to live was still trying to hold on to existence. Marcus stood there looking down at Jacob for a long time. He could feel the old part of himself, the part from before he came to the mountains, trying to wake up inside him. That part was saying he should help. That part was saying that a child's life mattered. That part was saying that he was the only person in the world who could save this boy. But the mountain man that Marcus had become knew better. The mountains were dangerous for one person. They were even more dangerous for two, especially when one person was completely helpless. Food was hard to find. Heat was hard to create. A sick boy would need constant care, constant warmth, constant food. Marcus barely had enough supplies for himself. Adding another mouth, especially a mouth that could not help gather food or create heat or contribute anything except burden, was a kind of suicide. It was choosing to die rather than live. Marcus looked at the boy for another long time. He could feel the choice hanging in the air between them, like something physical. He could walk away right now and go to his cabin. He could leave the boy here in the snow. By morning, the body would be buried under fresh snow. In a few weeks, the wolves would find it, or the birds, or time would simply take what it wanted. No one would ever know that the boy had been here. No one would ever blame Marcus for anything because no one would ever know. He started to walk away. He actually took 3 steps, his boots crunching in the snow, moving away from the dying child. He had made his decision. He had chosen survival over sentiment. He had chosen the hard path that the mountains demanded, and it was the right choice. He knew this logically, coldly, clearly. But on the 4th step, something happened that Marcus did not expect. His body stopped moving, his legs would not obey the command to keep walking. And when he looked down at his own hands, they were shaking. After 15 years in the mountains, after becoming hard and cold and completely focused on survival, Marcus realized that he was not as completely changed as he thought he was. Some part of him was still human. Some part of him still had the capacity to care about something other than himself. He turned around and went back to the boy. He knelt down in the snow, and he picked up the small, cold body, and he carried it toward his cabin. This decision would change everything. But at that moment, Marcus did not know that yet. He only knew that he could not leave the boy to die in the snow, and he was willing to accept whatever consequences that choice would bring. Jacob woke up, believing he was dead. The world around him was too warm, too soft, too comfortable to be real. For weeks, all he had known was cold. Cold was his truth. Cold was the only real thing. But now there was heat, and his mind struggled to understand what this meant. He opened his eyes slowly, and the first thing he saw was a ceiling of rough wood. dark with age and smoke. The second thing he understood was that his body hurt everywhere, like every part of him had been frozen and then slowly brought back to life in the most painful way possible. An old man was sitting in a chair beside him, smoking a pipe and watching him with eyes that held no expression. For a moment, Jacob was afraid. He did not know this person. He did not know where he was. He did not know if this was a real place or some kind of dream that dying people had before they went completely into the darkness. But the old man did not move or speak. He simply watched the boy with the patient focus of someone who had learned how to wait. "Welcome back," the man finally said. His voice was rough, like it had not been used in a very long time. "You have been asleep for 4 days. Your body was trying to kill you, but I did not let it." Jacob tried to speak, but his voice did not work. His throat was too dry and too sore. The old man, whose name was Marcus, seemed to understand. He poured water from a bucket into a cup and held it to Jacob's lips. The water was cold and clean and tasted like the most wonderful thing the boy had ever experienced. Marcus let him drink only a small amount, then took the cup away. "Not too much," he said. "Your stomach is too weak. We go slowly." Over the next week, Jacob slowly understood what had happened. Marcus had found him in the snow, nearly dead from fever and exposure and hunger. Marcus had carried him back to his cabin. Marcus had kept him warm by the fire. Marcus had given him water and hot broth made from deer meat. Marcus had watched him constantly, waiting to see if the fever would break or if the boy would slip deeper into death. And on the 4th day, the fever had finally broken, and Jacob had come back to the world of the living. This should have been the moment when Jacob felt grateful. This should have been the moment when he felt saved and blessed and happy to be alive. But instead, as Jacob began to recover his strength, a terrible fear started to grow inside his chest. He had seen the way Marcus looked at him. He had heard the way the old man spoke about supplies and food and the difficulty of survival in the mountains. Jacob understood, with the clear knowledge of a child who had already been rejected once, that Marcus was going to send him away. The abandoned child inside Jacob could see it coming. Marcus had saved him out of some moment of weakness, but weakness could not last forever. The old man would remember that Jacob was a burden. The old man would remember that an extra person meant less food for Marcus, less warmth, less everything. And one morning soon, Marcus would tell him to leave, and Jacob would have to go back out into the mountains and die anyway. Only this time, with the memory of warmth and safety to make the dying hurt more. So Jacob decided to do something unexpected. Instead of waiting to be thrown out, he decided to prove that he was not a burden. The moment he was strong enough to stand, he started working. He moved slowly at first, his legs shaking from weeks of lying down. But he watched Marcus carefully, and he copied everything the old man did. When Marcus carried wood for the fire, Jacob carried wood. When Marcus prepared food, Jacob stood nearby and watched every movement. When Marcus cleaned his hunting weapons, Jacob paid attention to exactly how it was done. Marcus did not tell Jacob to stop helping. He did not say the boy was in the way. Instead, something strange and unexpected happened. Marcus started teaching, not with long speeches or patient explanations, but with questions. When Jacob would pick up a piece of wood, Marcus would ask, "Why that piece? Why not the other one?" Jacob would have to think about what made one piece of wood better than another. When Jacob was preparing vegetables for the pot, Marcus would ask, "Do you see how the knife moves? Why do you think I move it that way?" These questions forced Jacob to think in new ways. He began to understand that survival was not just about having food and warmth. Survival was about understanding the world around you. It was about observation. It was about thinking before acting. It was about recognizing patterns and learning from what you saw. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was nearly 3 weeks after Jacob had woken up. He was stronger now, able to help with real work. His body had stopped shaking, his fever was completely gone. One morning, Marcus looked at him and said something that seemed impossible. "You are ready." "Ready for what?" Jacob asked. "To learn," Marcus said, "but not here, not in the cabin where everything is easy. You need to learn in the mountains themselves. You need to understand the thing that tried to kill you. You need to respect it and fear it and become part of it. That afternoon, Marcus took Jacob outside. The air was cold, but not the killing cold of deep winter. The snow was thick on the ground, but the sun was shining. Marcus pointed to a tree and said, "Tell me about that tree. Tell me what you see. Tell me what that tree is trying to tell us." Jacob looked at the tree. It was a pine tree, tall and strong, with branches that stretched out in a particular pattern. But what could a tree tell anyone? How was he supposed to understand what a tree was communicating? Jacob stood there confused and embarrassed, not knowing what Marcus wanted him to say. But instead of mocking Jacob for his confusion, Marcus simply started pointing things out. "See how the branches on the north side are shorter? See how the south side gets more branches? The tree grows toward the sun because the sun gives it life. If you are lost in these mountains and cannot see the sun, you find a tree and you learn from it. The tree already knows which direction is south. The tree already knows where the light comes from." Jacob felt something shift inside his understanding. The world was not just random and chaotic. The world was full of information. Everything around him was trying to teach him something if he only knew how to listen. Trees could point to directions. Animals could tell him where water was. Snow could tell him if a storm was coming. The mountains were not trying to kill him. The mountains were trying to teach him. "This is how you survive," Marcus said, and Jacob understood that the old man was not just talking about living through the winter. Marcus was talking about something bigger. He was talking about actually understanding the world you lived in, about becoming part of it instead of just hiding from it. That night, as Jacob fell asleep inside the warm cabin, he realized something shocking. Marcus was not going to send him away. Marcus was going to teach him, and more importantly, Jacob was going to learn. The abandoned boy from the farm was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, he had the capacity to become something more than someone who was rejected and cast aside. 2 years passed inside Marcus's cabin before Jacob understood that he had to leave. The teaching had continued every single day, through seasons and storms and the endless cycle of survival in the mountains. Marcus had shown him how to hunt, how to track animals, how to understand animal behavior by reading the signs they left behind. Jacob had learned which plants could kill him and which plants could heal him. He had learned how to build things that would last, how to plan ahead, how to respect the mountains without being completely terrified of them. But most importantly, Jacob had learned that Marcus had nothing left to teach him. The old man saw it first. One morning in the spring, when Jacob was 19 years old and Marcus was 64, the hunter simply looked at the young man and said the words that Jacob had been afraid to say himself. "You need to leave," Marcus said. There was no anger in his voice, no rejection, just simple truth. "You have learned what you need to learn. You have become what you need to become. If you stay here much longer, you will start to depend on me again, and that will make you weak. You need to know that you can survive completely alone," Jacob wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he was not ready, that he needed more time, that Marcus was like a father to him and he did not want to leave. But he knew that all of these things would be lies. He was ready. He had been ready for months. And if he stayed, Marcus would be right. He would become dependent again, and that dependency would be more dangerous than any storm or hunger that the mountains could throw at him. So Jacob left. He packed supplies that Marcus gave him: a knife, a hunting rifle with ammunition, a small amount of food, a blanket, and tools for building. He walked away from the cabin on a morning in May, and he did not look back. For 3 weeks, Jacob walked through the mountains searching for the right location. He understood now, in a way he had not understood before, that location meant everything. The right location had water, protection from wind, access to hunting grounds, and proximity to trees for building. He climbed ridges and crossed valleys. He examined caves and checked clearings. He was looking for a place that felt right, and he would know it when he found it. The canyon appeared on a morning when the sun was just starting to rise. It opened to the south, which meant it would get the warmth of the sun for most of the day. It had a small stream running through it that never froze completely, even in the worst winters. There were pine trees dense enough to provide shelter and wood for building. There were rock faces that would protect from the northern winds. And there was something else, something Jacob could not quite explain. The canyon felt right. It felt like a place where he could build a life. It was when the real test began. Jacob spent the entire summer building his cabin. He had helped Marcus maintain his cabin, but he had never built one completely from nothing. The work was harder than anything he had ever done. Every beam had to be cut and carried. Every stone had to be collected and shaped. Every piece of wood had to be fitted perfectly because a loose board meant cold air getting in, and cold air meant death in winter. By August, Jacob had built the frame and was working on the roof. He had cut large pine logs and was trying to position them across the top of the cabin walls. The roof needed to be steep so the snow would slide off instead of accumulating and collapsing the structure. Jacob was 20 feet in the air, standing on the partially built roof, when one of the logs he was repositioning suddenly shifted. It happened in the space of a second. The log was stable, and then it was not. Jacob felt his feet slide. He felt the moment his body was no longer supported. He was falling, and there was nothing below him but ground and rocks and the very real possibility of death. This was the moment when everything he had learned, everything Marcus had taught him, everything he had survived, could end in an instant of bad luck and physics. Jacob's hand shot out and grabbed a beam as he fell. His entire body weight suddenly hung from that one arm, and the pain was so intense that he almost let go. He could feel his muscles screaming, his bones threatening to break, his hands slipping on the smooth wood. He hung there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, his feet dangling above the ground, his entire existence balanced on the edge of death. Then, using strength that he did not know he had, Jacob pulled himself back up onto the roof. He crawled away from the edge and lay on the wooden frame, breathing so hard that he thought his chest would burst. His hand was bleeding, his entire body was shaking, and he was alive. Jacob sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, understanding something that changed everything. All the skills Marcus had taught him did not matter if he made stupid mistakes. All the knowledge in the world did not protect you if you were careless. The mountains did not care how much you had learned or how hard you had worked. The mountains cared only about respect and focus, and the constant awareness that a single moment of inattention could kill you. That evening, Jacob did something he had not done since leaving Marcus's cabin. He cried, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming understanding of how fragile his life was. He had survived being thrown out by his family. He had survived weeks alone in the snow. He had survived fever and hunger and cold. But he could still die. At any moment, in any way, he could die. But here was the unexpected thing. This realization did not make him want to give up. Instead, it made him more focused, more careful, more determined. Jacob understood that the only way to survive in the mountains was to accept death completely, to understand that it was always possible, and then to move forward anyway. The next morning, Jacob went back to work on the roof. He moved more slowly. He checked every beam twice. He tied himself to the structure so that if he fell again, he would not fall far. And he worked with a kind of fierce concentration that he had never felt before. This cabin was not just shelter. This cabin was proof that a boy who had been thrown away could build something that would last. This cabin was proof that he was worth something. This cabin was proof that he belonged somewhere. By the time winter came, Jacob's cabin was finished. And he had learned the most important lesson of all. You survive in the mountains not because you are special or lucky, but because you understand what can kill you and you respect it and you keep moving forward anyway. On the morning that changed everything again, Jacob was searching for something he would never find. He was looking for better hunting ground, exploring a ravine on the eastern side of his canyon that he had not fully investigated. The snow was melting in late spring, and the mountains were beginning to wake up after the long winter. He was thinking about nothing important, just moving through the forest the way he had learned to move, observing everything and expecting everything. That was when he felt something that made no sense. The rock beneath his hand was warm. Jacob stopped walking immediately. His mind tried to make sense of this. It was spring, but the nights were still below freezing. The sun was warm during the day, but it could not have heated the rocks deep inside a protected ravine. He touched the stone again. It was definitely warm, radiating heat that had nothing to do with the weather or the sun. He looked around carefully, examining the rocks, touching them one by one. The closer he moved to the back of the ravine, the warmer they became. Something was wrong with this place, or something was very, very right. Jacob followed the sensation of heat deeper into the canyon. The rocks were getting warmer, and then he smelled it. Something sulphurous and strange. Something that reminded him of the few times he had been near volcanic vents described in old stories. He climbed over rocks, moved around a stone shelf, and suddenly he saw it. Steam rising from a pool of water, water that was clearly far too hot to be anything normal, water that seemed to be coming from deep within the earth itself. For a long time, Jacob simply stood there staring. He could not believe what he was seeing. A natural hot spring, hidden away in a ravine that no one else knew about, giving away heat that the earth itself was creating. He approached slowly, carefully, understanding that something so hot could also be so dangerous. The water was too hot to touch. When he dipped a piece of wood into it, the wood steamed and began to scorch. This was water coming from somewhere deep in the planet. Water heated by forces he could not understand. Jacob sat down on a rock near the spring and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Wonder. Not the wonder of a child discovering something new for the first time, but the wonder of a young man understanding that something impossible had just become possible. This heat, this warmth, this water, it could change his entire life. Over the next few months, Jacob began to build a system to use the hot spring. He worked carefully, understanding that he could not force the water, but only work with what it wanted to do. He created channels from stone, directing the water toward his cabin. He dug a pool closer to his living space, insulating it with rock and sealing it with clay and tar. He ran pipes made from hollowed wood, carefully sealed so the heat would not escape. By the time the next winter came, he had a reliable source of warm water flowing to his property. The change in his life was almost impossible to believe. Before the hot spring, winter was a time of survival, of constant cold, of burning massive amounts of wood just to stay alive. Jacob's body would be cold from the moment the sun went down until the moment it rose again. He would wake shaking with cold, bundle himself in blankets, and sit by the fire all day and all night. His hands would crack from the dry cold. His face would burn and blister. Everything would hurt, because everything was exposed to temperatures that seemed designed by nature to kill humans. But now there was warm water. Jacob could fill a basin with water heated by the earth itself. He could soak his hands and face, feeling warmth sink into his frozen skin. He could heat water for washing, something he had barely done during the winter before. He could drink warm water, infused with herbs, warming himself from the inside, as well as the outside. The difference was not just physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was the difference between surviving and actually living. More importantly, the hot spring gave him something he had not expected. It gave him healing. During the second winter using the hot spring, Jacob suffered a serious hunting accident. He was tracking an elk when he slipped on ice and fell down a steep ravine. His leg was broken just below the knee, a fracture that in most circumstances would have meant amputation or death. The injury was so severe that he could not hunt, could not gather food, could not do any of the physical work that survival demanded. But he had the hot spring. Jacob spent hours every day soaking his injured leg in the warm mineral water. The heat relaxed the muscles around the injury. The minerals in the water seemed to have healing properties he did not understand. And the warmth, the simple comfort of warmth, gave his body the energy it needed to heal instead of just survive. By spring, Jacob could walk again. By summer, he could hunt. And by the following winter, his leg was completely healed. Other people began to hear about Jacob. Hunters and trappers who ventured into the high peaks would occasionally see him, and they would return to towns with stories that seemed more like legends than truth. A young man living alone in the mountains, they would say. He has built a cabin that is comfortable and warm even in the worst blizzards. He has discovered a natural hot spring that gives him water as warm as any bathhouse in a city. He's more skilled at hunting than men with 20 years of experience. He is more independent than anyone should be able to be. The stories grew larger with each telling. Some people said Jacob had made a pact with mysterious forces. Others said he was more mountain spirit than human. A few people understood the simple truth. Jacob had learned to observe, to adapt, and to make use of what the world around him offered. But the deepest truth was something even more important than any of these stories. Jacob had been thrown away by his family at 12 years old, with nothing but a blanket and some bread. He had nearly died alone in the snow. He had been saved by a hunter who was himself broken and lost. He had learned the hardest lessons that survival could teach. He had built his own shelter with his own hands. And then, when he had proven that he could survive anything that the mountains threw at him, he had discovered something that transformed survival into comfort. The hot spring was not just a source of heat and healing. It was proof of something that Jacob had come to believe in his deepest heart. The world was not trying to destroy him. The world was full of hidden gifts, hidden resources, hidden possibilities. You just had to be strong enough to survive long enough to find them. As Jacob reached his 30s and then his 40s, the boy who had been rejected became a legend. But he was a legend for the right reasons. He was not legendary because he was special or chosen. He was legendary because he had refused to give up. He had learned. He had adapted. He had grown. And when he finally found the hot spring, he had understood that life was not about struggling against the world. Life was about learning to work with the world, about finding the hidden gifts that were waiting for those strong enough and wise enough to discover them. The boy who should have died in the snow at 12 years old did not just survive. He built a life of genuine comfort, genuine independence, and genuine peace. And that, in the end, was worth more than any hot spring, any cabin, any hunting skill. He had transformed himself from a rejected child into a man who belonged completely to himself.